Hi, this is Paul. Friday afternoon, I was just looking at some YouTube, and Rationality Rules came up. And I noticed, well, I saw a bunch of videos he'd made about Jordan Peterson, and I knew he had done that. But then I saw one that was just recent. He had just made a video about Jordan Peterson. And this really sort of surprised me because, of course, Peterson hasn't really done anything for the last 7 or 8 months. Why is Rationality Rules still making videos about Jordan Peterson? To me, that says something about the impact of Jordan Peterson, even on a celebrity atheist who wants to continue to use him as a negative example. Now, actually, I really liked this video. Jesus Smuggling, is Jordan Peterson guilty? I really liked this video, and I thought the video was accurate in many respects about Jordan Peterson. I know Rationality Rules and Adam Friended have sort of had a feud in the past. Adam Friended is an atheist, but not an anti-theist, and of course Rationality Rules is an anti-theist. And in many ways, I thought Rationality Rules sort of made Adam Friended's point in this video. I want to just play a tiny little bit of it, which is really the conclusion of the video.
While Jordan doesn't Jesus smuggle himself, he facilitates an environment that makes it incredibly easy for others to do so.
In other words, Jordan Peterson is Jesus smuggling adjacent.
He's not the ant that carries the foliage, but he is the ant that clears and protects the path. He doesn't hate certain people
Jordan Peterson is an enabler, and this is really the critical phrase right here.
Because of who they are, but he is the ant that clears and protects the path. He doesn't hate certain people because of who they are, but he clears the path for those who do so that they can enthrone and maintain their bigotry and law.
They can enthrone and maintain their bigotry and law. This is the great sin, that the enthronement and maintenance of hate and bigotry in law. Now, I've noticed this before amongst the celebrity atheists. There's this really fascinating appearance of Richard Dawkins on Justin Brierley's Unbelievable program that I think is in like 2013. You can find it on YouTube. You can look at the thumbnail here. I'll put the link in the description. And what's interesting is that he's having this conversation with a Christian minister and a rabbi, and he basically tells them, "You're not the bad kind of people I'm worried about."
Rabbi Dawkins, I mean, I think I'm very happy with that gloss.
The rabbi just tells Dawkins that Dawkins' gloss, meaning Dawkins' summary of the story of Sodom and Gomorrah, the rabbi's down with. The rabbi's fine with it. And then Dawkins sort of tells us exactly what his game is.
Well, okay. But I still worry about people who I know you're not one of them, but that there are people who think the Bible is literally true. There are people in America, many of them, who want to have the Ten Commandments hung up in courthouses, contrary to the Constitution. And although you can find a decent commandment among the 10, thou shalt not kill, thou shalt not covet thy neighbor, etc., most of them you wouldn't actually want to base your life on.
Now I found this comment extremely interesting because, okay, well, let's say you're an atheist, so the first few commandments we'll just waive for you. I am the Lord your God who brought you out of the land of Egypt, out of the house of bondage. You shall have no other gods before me. You shall not make a graven image. Honor your father and mother. I think Dawkins would probably be down for that. You shall not kill. You shall not commit adultery. You shall not steal. You shall not bear false witness against your neighbor. That's about testimony in court. You shall not covet your neighbor's wife. He even signed on to that one. So, number one, I don't think the Constitution has a lot to say about wall hangings in decorations in courthouses. And number two, I'd really love to know which of the commandments he finds as incredibly objectionable, at least the ones with respect to human behavior. But again, what we see here, and this is a common pattern among the celebrity atheists, what they are really concerned about is politics. They are really concerned about morality in politics. And Rationality Rules said so they can enthrone and maintain their hate and bigotry in law. So if their hate and bigotry is apart from the law, that's okay. And a little bit later on in the video, I found this section particularly interesting. He was going to end the video, but then he adds this. He gets another twitchy celebrity atheist called Destiny, and again, Rationality Rules completely acknowledges this position.
I did what I normally do while gaming. I listened to YouTube videos. And in this specific case, I listened to Destiny. And interestingly, he essentially voiced the criticism of Jordan Jesus smuggling, but in reference to politics.
The problem with what Jordan Peterson does is Jordan Peterson makes a lot of descriptive claims, but he never makes any normative claims. So
Now again, what Rationality Rule says about Jesus smuggling is true, and I think it's exactly what Adam has admonished me a number of times, saying, well, you cross the line into, supernaturalism or something like that. Well, I'm a Christian pastor, so that's something that I regularly do. But here, again, this critique is Jordan Peterson tends to keep to the descriptive, not the normative. But
Jordan Peterson will say things like, women are not as happy today as they used to be. Women and men don't get along in the office. Men tend to be better at this thing.
Now, is he saying that Jordan Peterson's descriptive comments here are incorrect, or that Jordan Peterson's descriptive comments here are inconvenient, or his descriptive comments here are incorrect? Now, the sin that Jordan Peterson is charged with is essentially a religious crime.
And then that's all he ever says. He never takes a step further to make a prescriptive claim to say, like, what should we do?
It's a sin of omission
About something. And the problem is a lot of people will take the things that he says and then they jump to very bad places, kind of obviously. It's where you would expect someone to go based on what he said. But then he never takes responsibility for any of the kind of normative leaps people make off of his descriptive ones. And that's kind of the annoying thing with dealing with Jordan Peterson.
And
Jordan Peterson should take responsibility for the leaps that people make off his descriptive claims. That seems rather far-fetched, too. Jordan Peterson it seems to be guilty of their atheist religious crimes. What do I mean by a religious crime? If you watch my last monologue video, one of the ways to understand religion is a human authoring program. And Jordan Peterson apparently fails to salute the human authoring program that these particular atheists care about. More specifically, the political human authoring program. Remember, as I've said many times, politics is now and religion is always. And so Jordan Peterson is guilty of not preaching rightly in their Church of What's Happening Now, riffing on an old Flip Wilson sketch. He's leaving room for bad people to do bad things, as if it's Jordan Peterson's responsibility or ability to stop bad people from doing bad things based on his descriptive claims. In other words, if Jordan Peterson is making descriptive claims, and even true descriptive claims or warranted descriptive claims, he ought not to make descriptive claims if these descriptive claims sort of enable or support or leave room or be the little ant making way for the other little ants to do what this group thinks they shouldn't do. Who made Jordan Peterson responsible for everyone? Jordan Peterson is guilty because he's descriptive but not normative. But do you or don't you want him to make normative claims? I mean, that's kind of funny. To me, it sort of mirrors, I've never been one who's been pro-prayer in public school. That'll put me on a weird divide from a lot of other Christians, but that's, quite frankly, the way the church is. And my argument for that is, well, do you really want these public school teachers offering prayers? To me, that's, it doesn't really make any sense. I mean, what's the religion of the public school teacher going to be? They're probably going to offer a prayer in alignment with their religion, and it's not, in my opinion, it's not the job of a public school teacher to formally offer a prayer on behalf of the public school, because, well, it's the way it is. So do you or don't you want him making normative claims when you have suspicions about the norms, that his norms are immoral? They never tell us who these immoral people are, but I'm sure they could quite readily say, well, alt-right. I'm still not exactly sure who those people are and what their ideas are. It's sort of all the usual suspects, and it's just obvious. Now, this charge of insufficient enthusiasm for the Church of What's Happening Now is a very old one, and C.S. Lewis's fine little book, which is really just 3 not very large essays entitled The Abolition of Man, treats this, because C.S. Lewis saw the same kind of thing in the middle of the 20th century in England in the 40s, and it was this war between traditional morality versus today's evolved ascendant morality, today's new and improved morality. And C.S. Lewis goes through and says, essentially the argument I'm going to make here, that the only way they can actually critique traditional morality is by actually using traditional morality. And this is where Richard Dawkins' comments about the Ten Commandments are really strange, because again, apart from the commandments which are specifically theistic, let's say, which of the commandments do you really have a problem with? I'm genuinely curious. Now, usually a whole bunch of contemporary issues will flood into the mix. Same-sex marriage, trans rights, the pay gap, traditional monogamy, till death do us part as an aspiration. This is something that we should put away, according to many of these people. Supporting the wrong political party. Well, what's also interesting about this is that this is really quite a multinational conversation. Stephen Wolford from, I think that's his name, from Rationality Rules, he's in the UK. Jordan Peterson is a Canadian. Richard Dawkins seems to be quite upset about American politics. Well, okay, well, mind your own country. And there's Australia too. So is it just the English-speaking world? Can we include the Netherlands or Germany or some of these other countries? I mean, what exactly is the religious crime that you are upset with? Part of this goes into some really sloppy thinking about morality. There's a lot of inconsistency going on. Now, I think if you listen to Rationality Rules, he very much brings up what, I should really put this book here, what Christian Smith noted in his book Soul Searching, that many people today believe that morality is self-evident. That Destiny and Rationality Rules seem to imagine that morality is self-evident. Everybody should just be, it should just be obvious what morality is. And anyone who doesn't salute that self-evident quality and admonishes caution and nuance, which Jordan Peterson does regularly. In fact, if you listen to him, you won't hear him decrying same-sex marriage or trans rights or the pay gap, or he will admonish traditional morality, but in almost every case, what he admonishes is, hey, look, be careful with these changes. Past changes, Jordan Peterson is a thoroughgoing Darwinian, and he basically has a Darwinian view of morality and says you ought to be very careful before you just willy-nilly start going around changing things, because you don't really know the consequences. Jordan Peterson would say morality is not self-evident. We ought to, in fact, take great care in terms of looking at morality. But anyone who doesn't salute that self-evident quality or admonishes caution or nuance is insufficiently affirming, and that's Jordan Peterson's crime. You know, Adam and I have gone round about objective morality. I personally don't like the term objective morality. One aspect of objective morality, which I think the term is trying to point to, which I would agree, is that morality is something outside and beyond ourselves. But is it objective, sort of like gravity is objective? I don't think it's a very good term, and I don't think the term points us in the right direction. But what we find from him is a convenient lack of warrant to identify his source of morality, and this is very, very common. And so morality on one hand is self-evident, but morality is also both progressive and universal. So somehow, even though morality is self-evident, ancient peoples who very well could have understood gravity obviously didn't understand the morality which is so self-evident to us. And it's universal. So, I mean, this whole conceptualization of morality is deeply problematic. They keep reminding us of the calendar as if, on one hand, morality is supposed to be progressive and it's supposed to be universal at the same time. Well, how really does that work? Is something right in 2020 that it's wrong in 1900? See, I think actually there is a lot of nuance that is needed here and a lot of conversation, because in many ways morality is sort of progressive and universal, but you're not going to get it with your charge of it being self-evident. And then obviously feels free to judge ancient peoples and their heirs by today's standards, sort of a dead-naming revisionism about morality and history. Now, groups today should pay for the sins of groups in the past. This is a really dangerous precedent, something that actually religion has dealt with a lot in the past. For example, I think it was immoral for Christians to, blame the Jews for killing Christ, because first of all, Jesus himself was a Jew. That hardly seems like the particular aspect of Jesus' identity that should be highlighted in terms of the crucifixion of Jesus. But this idea of one group being, the heirs of one group being responsible for the sins of their ancestors, this gets terribly difficult. But again, in Christianity, you've got ideas of original sin and original guilt, and it's helpful to actually look at those doctrines and the conversations around those doctrines in detail before you just kind of go off and say, well, Jordan Peterson is guilty of all of the thought crimes that people who listen to him commit. This gets into the second point, that morality is both libertarian and legislatively demanded. Jordan Peterson is too libertarian in his complaints about Bill C-16. Compelled speech, I would imagine these guys would say, are demanded by the new ascendant morality. Okay, so morality is legislatively demanded, which again, as a Christian, having lived through a number of decades of conversation about morality in the United States, used to be that the left would say, well, you shouldn't try to legislate morality. And now suddenly, we're very much trying to legislate morality. In fact, we're trying to legislate the thought of people. Expressive individualism, Robert Bell identified in his book, Habits of the Heart. Expressive individualism is one way to look at sort of the normative default religion of our culture. Expressive individualism is the highest goal. If someone in their hidden secret self feels themselves to be one particular gender or one particular expression, well, government ought to mandate them the right to express that. But what we very quickly begin to see is that some expressions ought to be confirmed by this group by morality. People should be free from government intrusion in their personal lives. That used to be an argument about all sorts of things, as long as they aren't harming anybody else. But others must affirm the lifestyle expression of their neighbors regardless of their own moral intuitions. So expressive individualism goes out the window. You can express your secret furry self deep down in your heart, and the government ought to allow you to dress up like a cat and prance around in streets and maybe use a litter box. I don't know. But if anybody has thoughts or that are negative and wishes to express those thoughts, well, now the government has to shut them down. Well, what kind of a morality is this? What kind of expressive individualism is this? This is simply incoherent. And it seems, again, to just simply pass or fail the fairness test. Now, here's what's really interesting. Might even their unexamined and inconsistent morality have assumptions in common with Jordan Peterson? In an article, those of you who follow my Rough Draft for Sunday know I plucked out an article where this observation is made. C.S. Lewis said, "Nothing strikes me more when I read the controversies of past ages than the fact that both sides are usually assuming, without question, a good deal which we should now absolutely deny." You can find that with the Greeks. You can find that all throughout history. They thought that they were completely opposed as two sides could be. But in fact, they were all the time secretly united with each other and against earlier ages and latter ages by a great mass of common assumptions. So in fact, it might be helpful if we look at what perhaps is the common assumption beneath both Rationality rules and Jordan Peterson. Well, Western morality, secular humanism. I did a couple of videos, a little series on secular humanism just recently about, well, what exactly is secular humanism? Well, if you're trying to avoid listening to religious people, read John Gray. John Gray, as a very competent historian, notes secular humanism is sort of Christianity light. Try and strip out all the supernatural stuff, and there you have secular humanism. That's in many ways what Matt Dillahunty and Sam Harris argue for when they say, well, we can get to these things without the religious books, and we can derive them ourselves. Now, I think Glenn Scrivener really pressed Matt Dillahunty well on that episode of Unbelievable about that ability to actually do that without the religious text and without the community. But both have both want to have respect for the individual. Both want to assume the existence of human rights. There's a progressivism built into that, which Tom Holland notes in his book Dominion. Christianity really starts that. Secular humanism is really Christianity when you try to strip away some of the metaphysical claims and the supernatural claims. Progressivism really starts in the church, and the idea of the New Testament is a progressive revelation upon the Old. The idea of the revelation of Jesus Christ is a progressive revelation built on the Old. And even the idea that human activity can make the world better, of course, implies some sort of objective, unchanging, universal moral yardstick. C.S. Lewis, at the beginning of his book, Mere Christianity, makes that point, that everybody seems to have this moral yardstick. Where does this moral yardstick come from? And now, a lot of the inconsistencies I point out here, I agree. I think morality is both progressive and universal. But how do you get there? And actually, Christians have been working on those ideas for a very long time. Tom Holland, in his book Dominion, has Reformatio. It's a self-critique that develops in Christianity. And this, in fact, gets pulled into the modern era, and something that Rationality Rules and Sam Harris and Matt Dillahunty would all be very, very comfortable with. It's a balance of respect and critique for authority. That's very much what you hear Jordan Peterson asking for. And at the heart of all of this is an ethic of love. Now, this is exactly where the Jesus smuggling has happened. And it has happened a very long time ago, and has happened so successfully that Rationality Rules can't even see the Jesus smuggling he's doing. You don't need to smuggle Jesus, you demand his ethics already yourself. And again, if you don't believe this, take a look at the work of Tom Holland. Take a look at his Dellingpod interview on YouTube. Read his book Dominion. This is the point that he's making. This is the point that John Gray is making. This is a point that people have been making for centuries, but Rationality Rules doesn't see the Jesus smuggling that he's doing. Rene Girard said it really well in the first sentence of this quote. They complain because they have Christianity to complain with. And that's, in many ways, really what Rationality Rules is doing in his video, as is Destiny. They're complaining because they have Christianity to complain with. They're assuming Jesus' ethic of love and basically saying to other people, other Christians in fact, sometimes rightly, you're not living up to the ethic of your master. And Christians, more than anybody, could say, yeah, I'm probably guilty of that, because I don't think the ethic of love in every instance is self-evident what I should do. I find love to be often a weighty ethic, something that is not particularly self-evident in any particular situation of what love requires of me today. Rene Girard said it well. They can complain because they have Christianity to complain with. I'd love Rationality Rules and some of these others to actually explore more deeply their religion, their Church of What's Happening Now, their human authoring program. Explore the inconsistencies of it. They offer no footnote to the morality they demand. They assume the universality and self-evidence of the recent innovation. They seem to have no awareness of the hazard that 10 years from now, their Church of What's Happening Now will look sort of old too and be critiqued. We've seen this very quickly. It's important to remember that in 2008, Barack Obama was for civil unions in the United States. When's the last time you heard anybody talk about civil unions? That was Hillary Clinton's position until 2013. But now, 7 years later, anybody who's insufficiently celebratory about same-sex marriage is now a moral pariah who must be condemned. In fact, even if they're not, like Jordan Peterson isn't, making comments against same-sex marriage, he's just offering descriptive questions that might try to lead people to maybe ask deeper questions about whether or not very fast change in public morality is a very good thing. This is his crime. Well, Stephen Wolfert is a young man. It's in many ways it's the glory of the young to not know history because they haven't lived much of it. Well, I'd admonish you to Be a little bit more humble. Take a little closer look at your morality. Ask yourself, where do the roots come from? Ask yourself, what do you have in common with Jordan Peterson? Is your morality both libertarian and legislatively demanded? Yeah, in a lot of ways. I'm not in favor of laws against adultery, but I do believe that thou shalt not commit adultery is an important moral precept. One that, in fact, of all the changes in sexual morality recently, one that hasn't gone away. Expressive individualism is the highest goal, but if you watch people talking this way, you'll notice that they're extremely selective about what they imagine should be allowed to be expressed in public. And Jordan Peterson somehow was guilty of making comments about description and not norms. Well, do you really want him on there? So, yeah, so they can enthrone their and maintain their hate and bigotry in law. It needs a lot of work. Now, I'm going to do two versions of this video. If you're watching the short one, it ends now. If you're watching the long run, I'm going to take this conversation I had with Vaush, which I thought was an excellent conversation. He is someone who's very much is a proponent of polyamory and a whole bunch of these things. So he's sort of on the other side from me. But I thought it's sort of framed as a debate of whether Jordan Peterson did more harm than good. But I thought we had an excellent conversation. And I think, in fact, the kinds of conversations that Vaush and I had are important to actually have us gain a higher resolution about what is morality, what should politics look like, traditional morality versus today's evolved ascendant morality. I think these are the kinds of conversations we need to have because I actually think all of this stuff is complex. So again, if this is the short video, it ends now. If it's the long video, it'll go on for a while because I'm just going to splice that other video into this. So we'll see how the sound goes. I'll put links to them in the notes.